A very good afternoon to you on this Freedom Day. This is your Daytime Update. I'm Tami Ngubeni as we continue interrogating what freedom is, what freedom means, and how it is manifesting itself in 2021 in South Africa. Yes, 27 years into democracy. And in those 27 years, many promises were made to South African citizens in 1994. Now, these promises included access to free education, access to land. That was very key. Jobs were promised and a prosperous life for all South Africans. And while strides have been made to improve the lives of many black people under democracy, it is important, however, to take stock and to reflect on where there are shortcomings, because indeed those shortcomings do exist. Joining me to discuss this and to dissect various aspects of freedom, we're joined by Dr. Tracy Ledger, a senior researcher at the Public Affairs Research Institute. A very good afternoon to you, Doc. We've got with us in the studio Constance Mogale, the National Coordinator for the Alliance for Rural Democracy. A very good afternoon to you, and thank you for joining us. We also have Dominic Brown, a Program Manager at the Alternative Information and Development Center, as well as Timna Ntlanga, an Equal Education Equalizer. Thank you so much to all of you for making the time to be part of our conversation today. Perhaps let me start with you, Dr. Ledger, from the Public Affairs Research Institute. Now, there is a new research, a new report that was put together where you were assessing the state of the country when it comes to dealing with issues of inequality and issues of poverty, juxtaposing where we come from and shining the spotlight on where we are now. How is South Africa looking in its fight against inequality and poverty?
Well, we're not doing very well, and certainly the coronavirus pandemic hasn't helped. The report that we did looked specifically at the delivery of basic services and in particular the delivery of free basic electricity. And what we're seeing is that actually there are fewer people who have access to free basic services now than had access to free basic services 5 or 6 years ago. And, you know, that's a very important part of the social wage, the free basic services. So depriving households of their free basic services is really, really hitting poorest households the worst.
So basically, Dr. Ledger, you're talking about a regression in the last 6 years. But when we look at during the apartheid years, is there an improvement, or have we actually regressed from the years of apartheid?
No, I think there's definitely been an improvement. You know, there are definitely more people with access to basic services. There are more households that have access to electricity. There's been a lot of houses that have been developed. So, you know, it really isn't as easy as saying everything's improved or nothing's improved. There's a strong qualitative argument in that. I mean, you can look at, for example, the number of children in school, which is one way of looking at it, or you can look at the quality of the service that's delivered. You can look at the number of households that are connected to, let's say, water and sanitation services, or you could look at the quality of the service that has been delivered. And certainly there's no doubt that there has been a significant increase in the extension of all kinds of services and access to all kinds of things. The main problem is in the quality of the services that has been delivered to people.
And I guess this also points to what our expectations are as a people and what we deem and put as a benchmark. And let me come to you, Constance, with this particular question as far as rural communities are concerned. How are they faring in 2021 in so-called modern-day free democratic South Africa?
So the rural communities' expectations are doomed, because if you look at the history of the election and democracy and the ANC manifesto in 1990s, the promise of the 30% land redistribution within 5 years, which the goalpost was shifted to 2014 to 2021, and even today we still have no land, and so many percentages of land, over 80%, are still in the white hands. Now we see the acts, the bills that the Parliament is introducing, bills like the Restitution of Land Rights Amendment Act, and which wants to open up the the land restitution and the land claiming processes, which is going to reverse really the gains made from 1996 to date. Because if you get traditional leaders claiming land, or where the Restitution of Land Rights Commission has already finalized the claim, it means we're still going to talk about the same land that, whereas there's 87% of land that still has to be redistributed. We see government coming with traditional courts bills, traditional leadership and Khoisan bill. Now the land that is the 10% that is in the black hands, that is in the communal land and the former Bantustan, was regarded as land that was dry, that was barren, the land that was where black people can be dumped and suffer there. But now there's been a realization that the same land is mineral rich, and now there has been a coalition of government, private sector and traditional leaders to strip people of their customary inherited land rights. Remember, in the communal land, there's no tenure security. There's no law that that gives people tenure security except the Interim Protection of Land Rights Act.
I'm going to ask you just to pause for a moment, because you've touched on something quite key there, and that also talks to, I guess, the role of traditional communities and traditional leadership in free democratic South Africa. Are these systems that are actually still working for South Africa, and how can we relook at them? We'll be coming back in just a moment as we continue our conversation looking at different aspects of freedom in South Africa on this Freedom Day. Do stay with us. Very good afternoon to you. We're right in the midst of dissecting various parts of what freedom means in South Africa and how it's manifesting itself. Let me just reintroduce the guests that we are in conversation with. We've got Dr. Tracy Ledger, a senior researcher at the Public Affairs Research Institute. In the studio, we've got Ms. Constance Mokhale, the National Coordinator for the Alliance for Rural Democracy. Mr. Dominic Brown, who's a Program Manager at the Alternative Information and Development Center, and Ms. Timna Ntlanga, an Equal Education Equalizer. So let me start our first question now after the break to you, Dominic. In your organization, you focus specifically on economic justice, and that's the department that you manage. Now, in the Freedom Day speech that Julius Malema was delivering just a short while ago, he focused a lot on economic justice and said that freedom is really all about economic justice. How is South Africa faring as far as the transfer of wealth, the transfer of power, the transfer of resources?
Thank you, and it's really great to be here. So we don't only focus on economic justice, we also focus on the intersection or the coming together between economic justice and environmental justice. And if we have to look at how South Africa has fared since 1994 in terms of redistributing wealth, not very well. In fact, we've seen, in terms of wealth inequality, greater levels of wealth concentration among a select few, an elite. And so we don't, in addition to this, we don't have a net wealth tax or means of really redistributing the wealth from the very rich to the many who need it. And of course, when we look at issues of unemployment, where more than 11 million people are unemployed, and a situation of incompatible levels of inequality, I think it's more needed than ever that we begin to redistribute land as well as accumulated wealth. The richest 10% of the South African population, or 1% in fact, has the equivalent of the poorest 32 million people's wealth in total. I mean, how can we continue going in such a situation?
Tim, let me come to you as a young person and an equal education equalizer. How would you rate the type of education that you are receiving right now? Granted, you perhaps don't even have the perspective of knowing what it is that you need in order to be capacitated for the future. But how would you rate the quality of education right now, as well as the challenges that young people are experiencing in accessing quality education?
given to rate the type of education that I received, I would give it probably a 3% out of 10, or I guess a 3 out of 10, because not mostly our schools are very good schools. We all know that. And to actually give out an example, in Fulani we have about more than 500 kids that are not in school, but they don't even have school resources, right? So while there gets to be me or another child in a model C school who gets to learn through the computer, they've already completed half of the syllabus while I'm still in school on Freedom Day, that says a lot more about the inequalities that our education has, because we face a lot. It's safety. It's just a recent march that we saw in KZN where there were students that were marching for scholar transport because they logged longer hours to school and from school. So not only does KZN face those certain issues, but there are a lot of issues that they face, including the Western Cape. In the Western Cape, we face, say, concerns of safety because we're not safe in school. Sometimes there'll be stabbings in school, or kids get abducted while they're coming back from school, you know. And in the Eastern Cape, we already saw it on Cutting Edge. There were schools that literally had no infrastructure, and teachers were saying they don't really have anything to do, and especially if it's raining, the kids were told to go back to school after working longer hours in school. And also in Gauteng, there's an issue of overcrowding, and we all know it's Corona, and it's supposed to do social distancing, but the school cannot comply with the COVID-19 regulations because of the overcrowding in classes. So I would probably give it a 3, but even a 3, it's a bit of an injustice because it's not really what it should be. It's below 3. It's below 0. It's not something completable. It's not something tangible because it's like we're just given whatever's left off, and then we just give and take. We already take.
And Timna, that is certainly not a way to be feeling at a time in your life when you need to have as much confidence as possible and feeling that you are being capacitated to be able to have a future and to be building a future. Dr. Leja, what Timna's talking about here as well talks to the role of local governments as well in delivering services to the people. We've got the local government elections coming up. Where are the gaps, do you believe? Where are the opportunities to start making sure that local governments, that municipalities actually start delivering to their constituents?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and it's an incredibly complex question. There are a lot of factors that contribute to the current situation we see in local government. And I think one of the reasons why we haven't made as much progress as we should have to date is that very often people don't acknowledge the complexity of the issues and how many different things are interconnected to get a situation where a municipality can't deliver basic services. Our position is that there are certainly structural issues in local government. When we set about creating a different kind of state post-1994, there were significant changes at all levels of the state, but the changes at local government were most radical. We completely redesigned the state at that level. We'd never had wall-to-wall municipalities before. We'd never had local government that had so many responsibilities. We'd never had an intergovernmental system that relied on cooperation instead of top-down pressure. We'd never had this kind of local government fiscal framework before. So there were a lot of very new things that we were trying out. And not all of those things have worked out as we imagined. The local government fiscal framework is turning out to be extremely problematic. Significant numbers of local governments are in financial distress. There are multiple reasons for that. Certainly corruption and mismanagement plays a part, but just as much as the fact that local government has to raise most of its expenditure requirements from selling services to local communities who are too poor to pay for them. So we have this vicious circle where local municipalities keep increasing the cost of electricity and water and basic services. They have to raise 3/4 of their operational expenditure from selling those services. We're in a situation where 80% of South African households can't afford to buy a nutritious basket of food. So that whole idea, when this fiscal framework was put together, people didn't think that poverty and joblessness and unemployment would persist to the level. So that is one very significant problem. The intergovernmental relations framework is not working as expected. We're not working in a system of cooperation and coordination. It's proving extremely difficult to kind of get everyone to work towards a common goal. We have local agenda, local issues. So it's very, very complex. And, this kind of fiddling at the margin and trying to fix little things here and fix little things here is not working. Our position is very much that we need to consider a fundamental redesign. We need something that's fit for purpose, something that is going to deliver what it is that people actually need, because there's no doubt that the current system is essentially incapable of delivering.
I'm going to ask you, Dominic, just to comment on this. Dr. Ledger there spoke about unaffordability, and unaffordability is a direct result of people being either underemployed, underpaid, or completely unemployed. Talk to us about the state of unemployment in the country, as well as possible solutions on how one could possibly turn this around. And as you answer that as well, I'm going to ask if you could also maybe just talk a bit about, state-owned enterprises as well, and perhaps their role in job creation, if at all, if they ought to be having a role in job creation at all.
So there's a lot that you asked me to comment on. I hope you'll give me a little bit of time to do so. So in the first thing I would say is that I think the Timna paints, as well as that Dr. Ledger paints, is a clear indication that we need a complete overhaul, and that these are structural problems. And similarly, the problem with unemployment is a long-standing problem and a structural one, and it requires, therefore, not tinkering responses, but, as Dr. Ledger says, an overhaul of the system that underlies the crisis that creates this massive levels of unemployment. And just to say, when you have 11 million people unemployed, that contributes directly to the levels of income inequality that you have in the country, because there's 11 million getting virtually no income. So, and this has been getting worse as we have seen greater levels of wealth concentration post-1994. We also see an entrenchment of unemployment. Now, the current budget that we see, in spite of us all knowing all of these problems that have existed for some time, effectively slashes spending to basic education, to health, to social grants, to municipal, the conditional grants and the equity share grants, housing, and so on and so forth. The biggest cut of them all goes to the public sector wage bill. Now, by our calculations, these cuts will invariably lead to at least 60,000 retrenchments, or job losses, I should say, over the next 3 years. Now, this deepens the unemployment crisis. There's a bit of background noise coming through. But not only will it deepen the level of unemployment in the country, it will also reduce, further impede the possibilities of having service delivery in a context where there is literally no service delivery, basically, as Dr. Ledger paints or maps out. So what to do then? We need to move away from prioritizing growth, and through growth getting redistribution, through a macroeconomic policy that redistributes, that focuses on redistribution, redistributing wealth, and job creation strategies. So here we should say, in the first instance, we need a permanent basic income grant, and it should be implemented with immediate effect, actually.
Dominic, I'm going to unfortunately have to stop you right there because time is not on our side. But as we wrap up now, I just want to ask you, Timna, I see that you are on the move. But before we go, just your hopes for a post-matric qualification, and what you believe needs to be done in order to ensure that young South Africans get the education that they need over and above matric. We've had the fees must fall movement. It's actually still something that we are still seeing remnants of right now. What do you believe needs to be in place by the time it's time for you to be getting into university?
Firstly, it'll have to be the school infrastructure and the school safety more than anything, because without you, you can have everything at school, but if you do not have safety, then probably half of those things could be gone the next day you go to school, right? So for me, I'll have to advocate for safety because it's the most important thing. We're already in local or communities where we do not feel safe, where we got robbed while we're in our own houses, right? Get killed in our own houses. So if you also get to school, you will not be able to learn with the fear that you have. So I'll have to advocate for safety, and it's not that safety, it's the most important thing, but throughout the things, you just have to choose the one that you feel like is the most. So for me, I feel like it's safety because I'm already unsafe in my own community. So me going to school and also be concerned that I'm not safe or not safe, I'm not going to be able to take whatever the teacher or the content that the teacher is teaching because I'm already concerned about, am I safe or not? Or I'm already worried about thugs getting into school, and robbing all of us. So for me, I think there'll have to be safety, school infrastructure, textbooks, libraries, labs, because as much as the country is failing, or the number when it comes to scientists is very less because of the school or the type of education that we receive, because without science you cannot learn without a lab, because you'll never be able to experiment or create some labs, or without you knowing that if I add probably a chemical like this and this, then probably the reaction will be this. You can't learn it theoretically in everything that you do. So for me, it has to be school safety, infrastructure, scholar transport to school, overcrowding, because you can never learn in overcrowded classes. So it's most importantly all these campaigns that it does that I would actually say it's important, but not only that, but also the government owning up to their mistakes, the government being able to say, okay, we spent this probably 1 million or 200 rands unwisely or something, because owning up to your mistakes, that's what also is important. And whenever we ask for budget expenditure, they're not able to preview or give us the details specific of where did the money go to, resulting in us.
Timna, you're really pointing to some crucial fundamentals there. And when we talk about, macroeconomics and we talk about, big words, but ultimately you've just taken it down to even personal safety, which is where it all really begins. When you yourself are in a position to be free and be able to be productive in your own space. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there with our panel this afternoon. So much more to unpack, Constance, so much more. I think we're going to have to ask you to come back as well. We continue talking about the issues of rural development and traditional leadership, because that too, I think, deserves a lot of time and focus. I must thank you all for your time this afternoon. Constance Mohale, who's with us today, the National Coordinator for the Alliance for Rural Democracy. Thank you for your time. Dominic Brown from the Economic Justice Program at Alternative Information and Development Center. Ms. Timna Ntlanga, Equal Education Equalizer, as well as Dr. Tracy Ledger, Senior Researcher, Public Affairs Research Institute. Thank you so much to all of you. Coming up in just a moment, the state capture inquiry continues despite the public holiday. The former minister and Free State MEC, Mosebenzi Zwane, in the hot seat today. Tomorrow, we'll see President Cyril Ramaphosa in that very same position. We'll take a look at what we can expect. Do stay with us.